everyone, this is Sukanya,
And I'm Nishtha.
and we welcome you to yet another episode of Intersectional Feminism Desi Style brought to you by Feminism in India.
Today we're actually talking about something that's very important in terms of so through the course of this season we've talked a lot about consuming content on the internet. I feel like that's an undercurrent in almost every single episode that we've had. But today we're also talking about how with slowly but almost very pervasively now with the advent of the world moving towards a more digital realm, even news consumption and getting any kind of information, one of the first things that anyone does is go online and look it up. And what's happened with this change also, with people being so accessible because of the internet, is that when we talk about journalists, their lives too have slowly become a topic of public discussion to a certain degree. But sometimes the coverage of news tends to be really high. Actually, not sometimes, very often in our country, the coverage of news tends to be extremely loud and hyper masculine. And we, of course, would hope that there was more of a gendered lens to it. So today we are hoping to look at how news consumption and reportage changes and what are sort of the fluffings of that or the implications of that when we report news from a feminist lens.
So, to have this conversation with us on today's episode, we have a guest who has a rich body of work and experience in both digital and TV journalism. She started her career with Kerala's first 24 hours news channel, India Vision, in 2003, and then she moved on to the New Indian Express and subsequently to Times Now as a reporter, and then went on to become its bureau chief of South India. Now, later in 2014, she co founded the News Minute, which is a digital news website that focuses on news coverage based on the southern Indian states. So, we have with us for this discussion the co founder and editor in chief of the News Minute, Dhanya Rajendran. Thank you, Dhanya, for joining in.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
So great. So let's just dive right into the conversation. Dhanya, as Sukanya also pointed out, you're someone who shifted from a very long and very illustrious career in television news to digital journalism. And now, like we were talking about, we are seeing the way that the internet has changed the way we engage with and consume news. So, if you were to pick out some ways in which journalism has changed because of the internet and specifically the social media era, how would you describe that change? What works, what doesn't work? What would you say?
Well, now there are two different things here. One, of course, is digital news media, and the second is social media. So if you look at social media, I mean, I now cannot think of how we functioned before Twitter or Facebook was there. I mean, even around 10 to 12 years ago, there was no Twitter or Facebook from which we were primarily looking for news or opinions, etc. Right? So a lot of I think these social media networks also work as echo chambers from where you either get your story idea or you cater to a certain audience. So in that way, it's good. But I feel in the first few years when social media boom happened, the engagement with social media was very different from what is happening now. For example, I remember that around 7 to 8 years ago, when there was a trend on social media, there was a lot of pressure on media houses to cover those trends, to go according to what social media says. Sometimes even opinion used to be carved out from what people are saying in social media circles. But I think now that has become lesser. Journalists have realized that, look, social media is there. There are going to be people with controversial, polarized opinions there. You take that into consideration, but that cannot be what guides your journalism. I mean, at least a lot of journalists have discovered that. And so they continue to do their work. They are cognizant of social media, but it does not impact or direct their journalism, which I think is good. And as far as journalism itself is concerned, I think TV has completely stagnated in India, especially English and Hindi television channels have completely stagnated. Print continues to do much better than TV. They do better journalism. I mean, sometimes questionable, but definitely much, much better the journalism than television does. But digital is the way forward, not only because of the technology and the fact that it brings together elements of sound, visual, and text, but that at least in India, I have seen, perhaps due to the scale of operations, digital media are smaller, their scale of operations are lesser, and they seem to be much more aware of the fact that journalism is about speaking truth to the power, And so a lot of digital media organizations are at the front of doing that. Like I said, one is repercussions are less for digital media houses than TV is. And also, there is a different stream of thought, I think, amongst people running most of digital media channels. And I hope that thought is there to stay, that we are here to ask questions to those in power. We are here to speak truth to power. And our whole responsibility is to speak up for the people of the country.
Right, Danya. So, you have also previously, I think, spoken about how you would not want news to be sensationalized, and talking in the context of the post-truth world. Also taking away from how you spoke about how journalism is about speaking truth to power. You're someone who helms a media organization that works in the independent space. So, what are some of the advantages and what are some of the challenges that you if have experienced about being in the independent media space?
The challenges really are many, right? First thing, we are, like, let's say tomorrow you start a website. Who is your audience going to be? Who's just going to read because Danya started a website? No one. So it's basically you start from scratch. You have to ensure that you build an audience, and in the initial years you will really struggle with what is going to be a priority. Is it going to be an area? Is it going to be a ideology? Is it going to be breaking news? Am I going to do news slowly? So you keep on toggling with different ideas, and then slowly, steadily, you figure out what works for you, what works for your audience. And even if you do all this, like you have figured out a formula, suddenly Google will change its algorithm, Facebook will change its algorithm, and that's it. You're again screwed. So, I mean, it's a constant struggle. It's a constant learning and unlearning experience, I feel. The biggest challenge for the independent media really is the lack of funding in India to a large extent, because in the last few years, most people don't want to put money in media, also because it is sort of intimidating for people to put money in media when the government is unhappy with digital media, right? That's one. So the funds are drying up for most media houses. It's only through grants that many people are getting money, but even those grants are under a lot of pressure to either give less money or to balance between right, left, and liberal media, etc. And therefore, a lot of people have now turned to subscription, wherein they're asking their readers. So I know that often readers are wondering, how many people do we pay to? How many websites do we subscribe to? But the stark reality is, at a time when we are going through so much of turmoil, and the way our democratic process works itself is under question, there's no way out, but those who believe in the process of democracy will have to also make sure that they let independent media sustain. So I think finance is a huge challenge to run independent media houses. The second is to really carve your way forward. I mean, anybody can start a website. That's the beauty of the internet, right? It's a democratic space. Anybody can start it. But how do you sustain? How do you survive? How do you maintain credibility? How is that a continuous process? So it's a daily struggle. Um, so that way, when people now call me to ask, I want to start a website, can you tell me how to do it? My inner voice is telling me, please tell them not to. I mean, I know what the tension is for the last 7 years, but then I don't want to stop people from doing it, because we need more independent media. We need more niche websites. But inside me, there's a voice, telling me, Danya, please tell him the truth. It's not a happy journey. It's a difficult journey, but then eventually, when you do work that matters, I guess, you know, that's what is more important, right?
Yeah. No, I think so. Kanya and I resonate so very heavily with a lot of what you said, because even at our platform, those are kind of the struggles that we have as well. But one very interesting thing that you talked about was how there is a certain level of democratization that the internet brings forth, which perhaps legacy media organizations or these big names, and I don't want to take names, but say it's a lot more. Sure, finances are difficult on the internet, but it's a lot tougher to have your own TV news channel, and it's a lot tougher to have your own newspaper. So, with the democratization that the internet brings in, journalism in itself and the different lenses with which you can look at a story are also slowly changing. So you now have media organizations like ours that are focused on looking at news from a purely feminist lens. You have organizations that look at it from a gender and sexuality aspect, caste perspective. So all of those things also do are making some of a dent in how we look at news stories, which for the longest time that were being brought to us from a mainstream media house were controlled by a very homogeneous group of male journalists. So there is some of a dent that is being made in that the internet is bringing, hopefully, although it comes with its own massive amounts of struggles. So just one thing I wanted to know is how far do you think that the involvement of women in these roles of news reportage and presentation in digital production alters the lens with which we look at certain stories?
I mean, there is a huge difference, right? I still remember many years ago, a female editor of a newspaper, not the top editor, but she was telling me that basically someone came to the newspaper editor who was a male and said that we have an app to track periods. Women can just log in the dates and track their period cycle. This happened around 10 years ago. So apparently the editor rejected the story, saying that I wouldn't want my son to open the paper and read a period story on the front page. Uh, Therefore, that is one level of the problem, right? From covering politics, economics, pop culture, entertainment, crime most importantly, violence. There's always been a male perspective uh, uh, I would say, uh, that has been used on readers for such a long time. And I don't think there is a huge difference from how homogeneous the media was, let's say 20 years ago, and what it is now. It is still a very upper caste dominated field. There is absolutely no doubt about it. And that is, even if it is digital, print, or TV, it remains the same. I mean, so there is no dent that way. But if you look at through the gender lens, have more women become decision makers? Yes, but that too, I don't think there has been a huge dent. For example, there was a survey by Oxfam and News Laundry, I think around 2 years ago, which clearly said that women at top editorial positions are very few, whether it's newspapers or television channels. Digital is much better. But for example, I'm the editor in chief of the News Minute because I started the News Minute. A lot of women digital editors are there because they themselves started those ventures. If someone else started a website, would they have made me the editor in chief? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't know if I would have been given the opportunity to prove what I'm capable of doing, right? So we have a long way to go. And whether it's on gender, caste, class, whatever it is, we have a long way to go to ensure that our newsrooms are more inclusive. But I would say things have become a little better than it was like 5 to 10 years ago. At least we are forcing media houses to look at language. For example, a word like jilted lover, which was very easy to use around 10 years ago, people think a lot about using it now because there is constant dialogue against it, right? This is just one example, but there are so many like that. So when it comes to language, when it comes to reporting on issues, there is a lot of pressure exerted on media houses to change their ways to include, for example, media houses go to women when there is crime or violence or any women related issues. Why can't women talk about politics, about economics, about media, about so many other things, right? So, sometimes people must be wondering, who are these women who are constantly outraging, saying manel, why is there a manel, no women on it? I mean, these women have outraged for so many years, and you may find them obnoxious or tiring, but the fact is they have made a huge difference. And it is only because of their constant outrage and calling out, which is costing them their mental health actually. But there has been an impact. Media has started to behave differently. But like I said, it's a very small change now. We have much more to change, way more to go.
Right, Danya, speaking about the mental health cost of being a woman and outraging, and speaking about how language has to be better, the gender lens has to be better, etc. You've helmed the News Minute for a while now, and you are pretty vocal about your opinions as well on social media. I mean, you previously spoke about how you didn't like a film which starred a South Indian superstar, and there was a lot of cyber abuse that you were subjected to. Similarly, you've reported about Godmen, which has gotten a lot of hate by their followers and fans and everything. And we see this trend of women. I mean, especially when you helm an organization, that comes with a lot more of vulnerability, so to say. You put yourself out there and you speak about what you like, you don't like. Suddenly, you're slaughtered, you're attacked. So all of this cyber trolling and most of it is also very, very directed towards the woman's body, and it's very invasive and it's very violent. So this is something that we know and we see. What I want to ask you personally is, how do you deal with this on a personal level? Does it get lonely? Do you feel, are there days when you feel like, why am I doing this? And before the whole why I should be doing this, but thought strikes again, and you decide to move on and do what you do. Do you have those days where you feel really affected by it, and how do you deal with it?
So I don't have a clear answer as to how I react to things, as I react differently almost every day. Initially, I used to get very affected by I mean, I wouldn't call it trolling, I would call it harassment, because trolling sort of, minimizes the impact that it has. So my first thing is Indians should realize that social media harassment is an actual thing and it impacts people. The moment we think that, oh, it's just on social media, two people are just tweeting to you, what is the difference? Not physical, it's not real, right? And if we start dismissing it, then we dismiss the problem. So for me, first is acceptance that this is a problem. So I used to get very badly affected initially. I would lose my sleep. I used to get nightmares. My eyelids used to go daga 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 in the night because I couldn't sleep properly. And the thing is, when harassment happens on the internet, how much of a brave you are, or you put up with it, or you make a joke out of it, it eventually leads you to self censor. And I have self censored myself 90%. I don't even say what I think anymore. Like, I really want to say a lot of things, but I don't, because I don't think it's worth it. It's not worth my mental health. It is not worth my effort. Therefore, I stick to now putting pet pictures mostly. And sometimes, when I really feel strongly and I'm like, it doesn't matter what the harassment is, I will say what I have to, I go ahead and say. But most times I don't. The reason why is because I don't want to be talking to a huge crowd of people, uh, of whom most I don't know personally, and then they would just abuse. Like, it's, but the problem now is that we have reached a level where women journalists don't need to have an opinion to get abused. They just get abused for putting out news. Like, for example, I put out a news that some Congress leader has said something. I get abused for it as if I'm not the Congress leader. I'm merely the journalist who has tweeted a link saying the Congress leader said that. But people just need an excuse to abuse, especially women and women journalists with an opinion. So sometimes I don't want to give them the opportunity, so I keep quiet. I mean, if I want to say my opinion, I will, but most times I don't feel like anymore. Do I get affected? Not much. I mean, see, if you go to my Twitter, sometimes, when I'm really agitated, like 2 weeks ago, I had a fight with a friend of mine. For no reason, I was screaming at him. And then I screamed and screamed and screamed, and I suddenly said, live my life for one day on Twitter to him. I mean, it's not his fault at all. But then I realized that, though I think it does not impact me, at some level it does. I mute most of my tweets now. Like, if I put any controversial tweet, that's it, some 500, 600 abuses. So I just mute everything. Um, but to a lot of people who are new out there, especially young journalists, what I want to say is that what people on social media tell you uh, shouldn't be shouldn't actually what be what your journalism is about. If you need help, talk with a circle of friends, talk to your family, have a group who understand exactly what it is. Like, I have different friends groups. Some of them are not on social media. They're never going to understand if I tell them I'm getting abused. Maximum they will tell you is, oh yeah, that's very bad, but they actually don't understand. But I do have another group of friends who get abused as much or more than me. Therefore, we can exchange notes. So have that group which understands you. That's one way. But don't take everything too seriously. Like, sometimes when we put out a controversial story, I tell my reporters to mute their notifications. Because when you're young and you see so many opinions being thrown at you, there are two things, right? One is that you end up self censoring, and second is that you may change the way you do journalism because you're under so much pressure to say something that you may just change the way you say a story. So don't take it too seriously, but don't take it lightly also.
Danya, on that note, I just want to follow up and ask you, you have spoken about how it's important to find personal coping mechanisms, but since the social media is so wild and the abuses are so gendered and so targeted, especially with minorities and marginalized people of marginalized identities, women and other people, do you also feel that it is important for organizations to have some sort of organizational mechanisms to help employees, especially younger journalists, to cope and deal with this? Because otherwise it also sort of becomes a personal burden. Does that seem like something that's important, or do you feel it's not practical? Like, how would you look at it going forward?
See, at one level, it is not practical, Sukanya. Like, for example, if I'm the editor in chief, right? Somebody in my organization says something. I'm not a thought police. I can't tell them not to tweet something. Now, if they do, to some extent, I can bear the consequences of it, so can the organization. But what happens to their mental health? I mean, I can give them some support with counseling or giving them an off day or things like that. But largely, people have to understand what is their level of personal discretion, what is it that they can cope, and what is it they cannot cope. And they have to really, these are individual decisions which organizations cannot be a part of. But if someone has done a story, for example, someone does a story on News Minute, like tomorrow, let's say we are going to publish a story which is very controversial, and the journalist has to bear the brunt of it. That time, organizations have to step in, help in whatever way possible. I'm saying that organizations can help people who work with them in many ways. But it all begins from understanding that this is a real problem. Now, you cannot be an editor of a newspaper or television channel, not be on social media at all, and then think that what happens on social media does not impact your team. You cannot be oblivious to it. Therefore, everybody has to understand that this is a huge part of our life. It plays a crucial role in how we operate, how we think, how we put out things, and therefore we have to react. But like I said, if the reactions are extreme on a piece of work, then there is more support the organization can give vis-a-vis somebody says a personal opinion. Like, for example, I said a movie is not good and a lot of film fans come and attack me. What should the News Minute do? Is the News Minute then bound to protect me because I didn't like a movie and I went and tweeted it? No, it's not, right? But that doesn't mean the News Minute has to sit quiet. When someone is giving me a rape threat, the News Minute can as well as report it, say there's an FIR. So there are things that can be done and not done, I think. And it has to be a case to case reaction.
When we were talking about trolling, and whenever we've talked about it in the past as well, one of the things that I have been very interested in understanding, not for exonerating the trolls, but just for like understanding, like, because for so many of us this is unthinkable, right? Like, like, you wouldn't walk up to someone in the streets if you didn't like what they were wearing and tell them that whatever, they looked ugly. Which, if you come across a picture on Instagram of somebody and you don't like what they're wearing, many people are very trigger happy to say that, hey, you look ugly. So just understanding the psyche of a troll has been something that I have personally been very interested in. What is your assessment of the situation? Where do you think this kind of entitlement comes from on the internet?
Okay, there are a couple of things here. One is that, like you said, they're trigger happy. They just put whatever they want and they think there are no consequences to it, right? That's one. Second is people are wild, people are cruel, and therefore this is an opportunity for them. Like, I know a lot of people in my family or my friend circle who are bigoted, who perhaps did not like Muslims, who look down upon oppressed castes. They would say that in whispers in their dining tables, but now they'll put it on Facebook, and there'll be a lot of people who like it. Therefore, people are wild, people are cruel, and now they've got an outlet. But the most important thing is people don't understand the impact this has on the person who's at the receiving end. Now, a person who harasses, trolls, etc., let's say, for example, 2 days ago, not 2 days ago, a week ago, there were a lot of these tweets after one Malayali influencer had to say something about the News Minute, and everybody is just tagging me, saying prostitute, things like that. Now, the person who's writing that tweet thinks, oh, I am calling Danya prostitute, 50 people are retweeting it. So there's no impact on her because it's one tweet, right? But that person does not understand there are 50 tweets like that on my timeline. Each one gets 50 retweets, and I'm reading each one of them. So I had an opportunity to actually interact with a harasser of this when this actor's case happened. I had given a police complaint based on which they tried to arrest one man from a village in Tamil Nadu. He had applied for anticipatory bail. Then first his mother called me, and then he spoke to me. So imagine he was sending the most abusive things to me on that particular day when they decided to troll me. In fact, he sent out a warning saying, "Watch out, the trolling will start at so and so time." So it was an organized activity. They started at some 6 o'clock something. So I spoke to this guy. I asked him, "Do you know who I am?" He said, "No, I had never heard of your name. I think I'm a famous journalist, but I'm not." That guy's never heard of me. He did not know of my existence till that previous day, but it came on the groups that I am the fan of a rival actor, and therefore I am wantedly putting down their actor. Therefore, it was put on the WhatsApp groups that I should be targeted. This guy does not know my name. He does not know where I live. He does not know what I look like. He's simply been told that I am someone who needs to be taught a lesson. And therefore, he sends these threats to me. He does all kinds of things. And when the police is knocking at his door, he apologized to me. And I also thought that, okay, maybe it's a bit too much because it's not like some guy who's had a grudge and has followed me for years and wanted to do something. Just trigger happy people, right? And now we have a good relationship in the sense he called me Akka. I talked to him back. But the point is, uh, he started out like that without having any clue who I am or what his actions, how his actions will impact me. So more than people being vile and people being trigger happy and not scared of consequences, they just are not taking responsibility for their action. They don't understand the kind of impact they have, which is why it's important to ask, would I say this comment if I see someone on the road personally? Would I walk up to them and say, prostitution is difficult because you have to sweat a bit, prostitution is fine? This is exactly what somebody wrote to the News Minute handle a few days ago. If you see me on the road, would you tell me that on my face? You wouldn't, right? So people need to think before they type.
So we've come to the end of this podcast, Danya. And before we wrap up this episode, I just want to ask you one final question. This is for everybody out there who's listening to us, every young aspiring journalist, everyone who started out on this journey or is quite confused or conflicted by what's happening on social media, etc., and also juxtaposed by the broader political climate and everything. I just want to ask you, what is the one thing that you would tell somebody like that who might be listening to this podcast? What is the one thing you would ask them, you would urge them to probably hold close to themselves as they, tread on in this journey?
I mean, I don't want to say something very serious like become a journalist, you will be speaking truth to power, you will be helping this country in this fragile situation, etc. I just want to tell them it's not a boring job. It's an adrenaline rush every day. You get to interact with so many people, you listen to so many stories, you get to tell these stories. I mean, imagine, I'm sorry to everybody who works in a bank or a IT company like my brother does, but what a boring job. I mean, you're continuously. My husband was an HR manager, and I know how boring his life was. He was constantly having tea breaks, and now see his life is so interesting because he is now heading a news organization, right? I mean, you meet so many different people. You don't hear the same thing twice in a week. You just today you're covering, let's say, road has collapsed. Tomorrow it's something else. Day after it's some violence. So you learn you learn how human beings behave, how societies react, how dangerous or good people can be. You see all sides of life every single day. It can be overwhelming, but it's really the best job as far as I can vouch for. It's not highly paying. It, as far as hours go, it's not very rewarding, and it may not even be very good for your mental health. But still, there's really no other job like journalism.
Agreed. Checks on everything that you've said, like fully agreed. Well, again, that brings us to the end of this very exciting episode. I think that we have been able, like, honestly, Dhanya, thank you so much for sharing that story about the troll, because we often don't I mean, I have never heard of anything like this, so it was wild for me to listen to that. So, Kanya, I don't know about you, but
Me neither. No, I've never heard of a troll getting back. I've heard of trolls saying sorry and everything, but I've not heard of a person, being that sort of nuanced to look at where the other person's also coming from, and then having that sort of relationship. It's also wild for me.
so thank you so much, Dhanya, for coming today. We hope you had as much fun as we did.
No, it was fun. It was fun. Young people becoming journalists.
So yeah, I mean, here's to many more of our many more of people like us. And to our listeners, thank you so much for sticking with us for this long. We will be back next to next Thursday with another episode. And in the meantime, thank you so much for tuning